I was going to address Simon Tay, but I think he's still in the toilet. But a very good afternoon to everyone present. I'm surprised, to be honest, to see so many people. And Nicholas was just telling me that it's a very eclectic and diverse group of people down here. But perhaps this is just as well. I think it illustrates the significance, the importance of the topic under discussion today. I want first to express my appreciation to SWR2014 for organizing this dialogue. And the theme of the dialogue, sustainable world resources, is a most apt one. The question that we confront, and when I say we, I don't just mean Singapore or even just Southeast Asia, but indeed as the entire globe. The question facing us is, how do we balance the needs of the global population, one that is growing, one that is urbanizing, a population that is consuming ever more resources over time. So we've got that on the demand side on one hand. On the other hand, we have to deal with limited resources, limited land, limited biodiversity, and a limited capacity of the world's ecosystems to absorb the external impacts of all that we do, including carbon dioxide, PM2.5, and all the other toxins and other stuff that we produce in the course of our economic activities. And overriding this balance has to be a longer-term view of what are we going to leave behind for the next generation. I was reading an article before I came here, and I think I could paraphrase it this way. You know, we often think of life as a sprint, short term, or we think of it as a marathon, long term. But perhaps a better way to understand life is to think of it in terms of a relay, which means it's neither short, it's not just a sprint or a marathon for ourselves, but a relay for successive generations. And perhaps that's a better way of looking at our responsibilities. I think it was just about 2 weeks ago I was in Jakarta. I recognize some faces here today. I spoke at the Forest Asia Summit, which was organized by the Center for International Forestry and Research. And I touched on the topics of sustainable landscape management and green growth. And really, in a sense, that is a subset of the larger range of issues which you're discussing here today. All of us, I think I can honestly say every single person here is a stakeholder in the business of managing our resources and our landscape. And in the pursuit of this, we need to remember our global responsibilities. And you know, some companies, by definition, will be responsible and will consider externalities because perhaps their founders or their owners are ideologically or ethically or philosophically wedded to it. But that's not a sustainable basis because there are others, and we need to remember the bottom line is that companies exist to generate positive returns for their shareholders. And any system which misaligns the interests of the shareholders' immediate returns and the company's responsibility to their stakeholders, both at the local and regional level, eventually will come to grief, even with the best of intentions. Part of the problem is that sustainability is not something which is easily measured, even in financial terms. I know we talk about the triple bottom line, but you and I know it's much easier to see sales figures, to see profits and losses, than to measure impact on local communities or impact on the world at large. I mean, let's be honest about it. It's also not immediately apparent to anyone who's running a company, particularly if you're under pressure, that you should prioritize the considerations of environmental impact, of external impact or of non-shareholder stakeholders. So remember, it's okay when you're doing well, you're feeling generous, you're feeling responsible, you can afford to be good. But precisely when you're under stress, that's the moment when you have to prioritize and you will choose, and you know which way the priorities have to go. So I made 3 points when I was in Jakarta 2 weeks ago. The first point I made was that the root of our problems with transboundary haze is misaligned commercial interests. The reason companies will take shortcuts, will burn forests, will engage in unsustainable degradation of land, for instance, by draining peatland, is simply because the economics favors such behavior. You make more money from doing this. And the profits that you gain from engaging in such behavior accrue to you immediately. The externalities, the closure of the airport, the health impact on the people around, both within or adjacent to the plantations, or even further afield in Singapore, those impacts do not appear on your bottom line. So there's a very clear incentive to continue this behavior. So that's the first point, misaligned interests. The second point is that although we say, and we were indeed adversely affected in Singapore, we should also acknowledge that we were not the worst victims of transboundary haze. The worst victims were the local indigenous people living within or adjacent to those plantations. And again, it requires a sense of perspective, because this is not a Singapore versus the companies or Singapore versus the Indonesian issue. Not at all. This is about human beings suffering, confronting an impact to their lives, and not only just the health impact, but there are other economic impacts of transboundary haze. When airports close, when logistics chains are compromised, when schools are closed, when factories are closed, there is a real financial and human cost to this impact. And the point I made in Jakarta was that, in fact, the heaviest burden is borne by the locals. The third point I made, and I think this is relevant for today's gathering, is that there is an urgent need for governments, for non-government organizations, and for local communities to insist on transparency, to collaborate more effectively on both short-term mitigation and long-term solutions. And there needs to be a political will to act, to investigate, to enforce, and to penalize. Quite honestly, there's actually not a shortage of laws. There are laws against the burning of forests. There are laws against degradation. But laws without political will, without administrative force, are ineffective. On this issue of legal powers, I think many of you would know, we intend to enact local legislation in Singapore that will deal with transboundary haze pollution. And I hope to get this settled in Parliament in the second half of this year. The severe episode that we experienced in June last year showed us how much this kind of transboundary haze can affect all of us. And as I said just now, not only in Indonesia, but Malaysia, Singapore, and beyond. The legislation that we are considering will have extraterritorial reach. And I stress that extraterritorial reach because this is not something which we enter into lightly. Nevertheless, by its very nature, we felt there was no alternative but to ensure that the long arm of the law would be long enough to deal with a regional problem. It would criminalize companies and persons in charge of those companies who cause transboundary haze, and perhaps just as significant, it would provide for civil action to be taken against these companies, which means you could be liable for the economic losses which you cause to third parties. Third parties can take these companies to court in a Singapore court. The Singapore government has also appointed an international advisory panel on transboundary pollution. This panel consists of 8 distinguished law experts. In fact, they will be meeting, I think, later this month for their first meeting. Their terms of reference include to study and to advise on the trends and developments in international law relating to transboundary pollution and the options available to Singapore under international law. I emphasize that latter point, the options available to Singapore under international law. As aptly put by my Deputy Prime Minister, Mr. Teo Chee Hean, in order to protect the health of our people, to safeguard our economy, we need to explore all available avenues to tackle such environmental challenges. We would also encourage other countries to consider formulating or revising their own laws to stop companies from exploiting their resources in an unsustainable way and on adversely affecting their own people. And quite frankly, in order for these laws to work, both domestically and extraterritorially, there will need to be effective collaboration and cooperation amongst the authorities in all the countries. Because otherwise, there will be difficulties adducing enough evidence that could stand the test of a court of law. So this call for cooperation amongst authorities is a sincere one. This is not something which we can embark on unilaterally. Now, governments can pass laws, but governments are not the only stakeholders in this game. And we believe non-government entities, companies, as well as NGOs, have powerful levers in your own right. And let me cite a few examples. We've heard of the company called Unilever. It's a big, extended company, huge interests, many parts of the world, including Southeast Asia. And I commend Unilever. I don't know whether anyone from Unilever is here, but I commend them for playing a leading role in the transformation of the palm oil industry by emphasizing the importance of sustainable cultivation. I know that Unilever sets a target, it has set a target to require all palm oil that Unilever buys globally to be traceable to its known source. That means down to the plantation itself. It has also committed to sourcing 100% of sustainable palm oil from certified traceable sources by 2020. Unilever knows it cannot accomplish this alone, and it's working with its entire supply chain in order to give effect to this commitment. An example would be its initiative to study high carbon stock forests and to mobilize others in its efforts to build a traceable, transparent supply chain system. So this point about transparent and traceable supply chain all the way down to the individual field is crucial. Another company is Olam, which has implemented systems and processes to track the chain of custody across the supply chain. It has put in place a set of comprehensive conditions to purchase and trade raw materials and products that are produced in a manner that is socially responsible, economically viable, and environmentally sustainable. As a buyer, a trader, or even as a bank providing finance, you have influence and leverage that you can bring to bear on plantation players. And another organization which I wish to cite is the Roundtable for Sustainable Palm Oil, RSPO. I met some of its leaders last year. It has the objective of incentivizing sustainability in the palm oil industry. But it came under fire last year for not doing enough to enforce its principles and criteria on its own members. The issue of concession maps has been one key sticking point. With no standard, authoritative, publicly accessible maps available, it makes it hard to pin accountability. Today, with today's technology, we know when a fire has been lit. We know the exact coordinates of the fire. But to track it down and hold some company or some person or some director responsible requires concession maps. But talking about maps, there's another organization called the World Resources Institute, whom I've also had engagements with. And they have developed a real-time forest monitoring and visualization system, which incorporates the latest satellite monitoring technology, forest management and company concession maps, protected area maps, and mobile technology, supplemented with crowdsourced data and on-the-ground networks. The Global Forest Watch initiative has garnered worldwide attention for being the first unified effort to bring together disparate sources of information about deforestation, put it on a common platform. I would also add, I mentioned RSPO just now, that I am glad that RSPO has more recently passed a resolution making it compulsory for its members to make information on their plantation concession boundaries publicly available on the RSPO website. So the point I'm making is that if you add the information which governments are making available, so for instance, hotspot data from satellites, we would make that available together with exact coordinates. RSPO sharing its members' concession maps. WRI sharing multiple sources of data. Think, we now talk about big data and analytics and the other things. Regardless of the sources, as long as those are authoritative sources, it is not difficult to compile, collate, and put it all on a common platform and to hold people accountable. This, I believe, will happen, whether or not companies are comfortable with it. It will happen because people will demand it. The technology is there. The eyes in the sky are there. The boots on the ground are there. And I believe there is political will for change to occur. So I've shared some elements of our own experience, the perspective from the government, as well as some of the initiatives which the non-government organizations are embarking on. And I think earlier on you've probably heard from the companies on their own efforts. You see, from a company point of view, I'm very mindful that until and unless we give an advantage to companies which are more responsible, if we don't achieve that, the companies who are less responsible, who are not bound to high standards and accounts, will gain a head start. So it's not just a level playing field. We actually have to tilt the playing field in favor of those who are responsible. And this needs to be an international effort, and it needs to be based on facts and transparency. One key point, someone told me that Steve Jobs had one key insight, which is that seeing someone do something, someone else do something, makes you more likely to do it as well. This is what they call the power of observability. So apart from trying to tilt the playing field in favor of responsible companies, we want these responsible companies to be visible, to be role models, to be held up for emulation, to be respected, and for others to want to do business with them. So that committing and implementing sustainable practice will not just be a morally, ethically, or philosophically right thing to do, but will also make commercial sense. The World Wildlife Fund's Living Planet report in 2012 highlighted that our demand for natural resources has doubled since 1966. And we are currently using the equivalent of 1.5 planets to support our current activities. Given that we have already reached 7 billion human beings, and we're likely to add another 2 billion in the decades to come, and that there is an exploding middle class, especially in Asia, with higher per capita consumption. The graphs do not compute to a sustainable level. So whether we like it or not, business as usual is not possible. And there needs to be an inflection point, there needs to be a change, there needs to be a break from the past. All of you here represent organizations or your individuals in your own right who can make a difference to protecting and multiplying and sharing our precious resources in an equitable way to all stakeholders on planet Earth. We have a duty to be good stewards of our planet because we don't have 1.5 planets, we only have one planet. We only have one atmosphere. And I appeal to you, and I am grateful to you for your support. No one likes to be the bearer of bad news. Just a few days ago, I told Singaporeans, we have to be prepared. The haze this year could be worse than last year. Why? Because the indications are we're heading towards an El Nino year, a dry year, drought. It is sobering that in February this year, not a usual time when we had haze, that in fact the haze in Riau in February this year was worse than it was in June last year. That's because we had a 2-month dry spell in Southeast Asia. If we get a 4 to 6 month dry period in Southeast Asia, starting from June, we could be in for a very difficult period if companies and people's behaviors do not change. I don't like to be a bearer of bad news. I hope I'm wrong, but I'm appealing to everyone to do the right thing and make a difference, and let's end this multi-decade scourge on our environment. Thank you all very much.